Hello, wonderful. This is Sarah, and I'm here with Julie Shafer, and we are going to talk self-worth. I know that is many of your favorite conversations and such an important conversation after a toxic relationship. How are you, Julie?
Oh, I'm awesome. Thanks for having
Okay.
me.
Well, let's tell people where we met because I was a part of your summit recently,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. I know. I ran across you online and thought, oh, this would be a perfect conversation for my summit. So I did the Finding Love Summit back in September, and
Mm-hmm.
it was great. Yeah,
Oh, yeah, great, and a great conversation and connection. So I was like, oh,
yeah,
we should reconnect again.
yeah,
Um,
totally.
so what do you bring to the conversation around self-worth and toxic relationships? Do you have any background in this?
Yeah, so a little bit of coming at it from a couple different angles. So I'm a psychologist. I've been practicing for over 15 years in private practice here in Portland, Oregon. But I also have my own personal history with toxic relationships. I was in a 20-year marriage and didn't realize that the struggles I was having were because of verbal and emotional abuse. I thought I was getting it wrong somehow, like it was my fault. And went all the way through grad school, and I made it through grad school. I really resonated with when we had our conversation and you talked about smart girl syndrome,
Mm-hmm.
and how much I was, working at grad school and working on my marriage and just working really hard. And I didn't understand why every birthday would just be destroyed. Like it was, it was a time where we would have a big argument and it wouldn't turn out well. And, other significant days and things had to be done his way, and I could never get anything right. And I really felt like I had no worth. I could never get there. I was constantly striving to get there. And so, fast forward a number of years in practice, and I had a client who was struggling with a toxic relationship. And I reached out to a colleague who I knew worked with men who were abusive. And when I thought of abuse, I thought of, hitting,
Exactly.
punching,
Uh-huh.
slapping, that kind of thing. And I suspected that was happening with my client. So I reached out to this colleague, and he suggested that she read this book called The Verbally Abusive Relationship. And I thought, well, I'm not going to recommend a book I haven't read. So I started reading it, and I was like, holy cow, like,
Mm-hmm.
what the hell's going on here? This is
Mm-hmm.
describing me to a T. And so that started my journey into looking into this, and really advocating as best I can for my clients when I feel like they're being in a relationship that's toxic or abusive in some way, because we don't recognize it. I mean, I went through grad school. How could I not know this?
But I've heard this story 100 times, and I've talked to Patricia Evans, the author of The
Yes.
Verbally Abusive
Yeah.
Relationship, and she went to grad school to try to learn more about verbal abuse, which wasn't really a term yet. And
Yeah.
so she went to her, I think it was her something to do with her brother. Like that was the verbally abusive relationship. Like I'm not sure it was her parents and a brother, or but that's within that context.
Uh-huh.
And she kept saying, oh, where can I learn more about this? Where can I get a book on this? And her professor said, well, if you want to read a book on it, you're going to have to write it.
Oh, so she wrote
And
it.
that was the story of the verbally
Yeah.
abusive relationship, which I think
Yeah.
is a really fascinating story. When she
Well,
told
and
me
it,
that, and
and it was really well written, I thought, because it just nailed it.
it was
And
the first book I read as well.
yeah, yeah.
It was the
It
first book I
just, and
read
it's
too.
so eye-opening.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, yeah.
Yeah. So that was my eye-opening experience. And why I'm very sensitive to the issue of people finding themselves in toxic relationships, um, and how therapy just typically isn't a good place for them, or especially couples therapy is not a good place for them.
So I have my thoughts on why that's not why couples therapy is not a good place. Can you give your insight into that?
Yeah, well, my experience has been around couples therapy. I work with individuals. So my experience, I don't have like this big range of experience, but I have done a little bit of couples work, and I have done my own couples work. And what I noticed so it didn't take much, right? is that the couple walks in with a story about what's wrong in the relationship. And the toxic person has told their victim that they're the problem. And so they both walk in talking about how he or she is the problem. And the therapist then unwittingly is colluding in that story. I know they try not to, but it's, oh, well, you just need to tell him something that will make him not lash out at you. Or and I'm saying she because that was my experience, but I know it goes both ways. But if the victim's female, she's buying into the story that it's her fault. And when the therapist says, oh, well, you need to do something different, she goes at it gung ho, and it doesn't change anything. And the guy looks like he's doing everything right, and he just wants to be understood. And so he gets a lot of sympathy and empathy from the therapist. And I never personally try to do that, but I feel like as a therapist, it ends up being something that comes out very subtly, no matter how the therapist tries to remain neutral in that.
Well, and I've heard that in that situation, quite often the relationship is the patient, correct, not necessarily each individual. The relationship is the patient. So they're coming to you to fix the relationship, or to a couples therapist to fix the relationship, not to talk your husband into accepting his narcissism, or the things that people want to go to couples like, oh, I put up with this so long. Maybe if I find a professional to tell, my husband in this circumstance, him or her, that verbal abuse is real, they're verbally abusing me, that it's going to solve the problem or solve the relationship. But the therapist's goal pretty much is to keep the relationship together. And the easiest way to keep the relationship together is to talk the person being abused into staying abused. That's the easiest way to keep a relationship together.
That's a very succinct way of putting it. Yeah.
Yeah. A little more complex, nuanced. Yes. That's what I've seen, and it's heartbreaking.
Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. It's absolutely heartbreaking. And it's not something that it's not going to fix anything. And I used to have these like marathon conversations with my husband about what was wrong. And he would always twist it around to what I should be doing differently, or how we could be interacting differently. And it would last for like 4 days. And then we'd be right back to where we were. And it was always me having to change.
Yep, that's smart girl syndrome.
Yeah,
yes.
Totally.
So let's talk about the concept of building self-worth after those types of experiences, because it's important work to do after a toxic situation.
Yeah, and in my story, it had to start before I tried to get out of the relationship.
Sure.
Because I couldn't get out until I had some sense that I was worth getting out for. Like the problem wasn't all me. And until I had some sense of my own worth, I wasn't going to get anywhere. And so how do you start the process in the setting of this relationship that is so hurtful, and continually breaking down your confidence, your self-worth, the sense of you being worthy of that kind of care.
And before you move on, I would love to say what within that context, because you hear these women wanting to stay well, how do I stay in this situation and not let him bother me? How do I stay in this situation and not let it affect me? And that very closely tied to how do you build your self-worth while you're being torn down. Can you speak into that at all?
Yeah. So what we want to do is sort of this is the way I see it working, is we withdraw a little bit, and we have to get to a place where we can look at the dynamic. And I think that that's where the verbally abusive relationship book came in good for me. And there might be others, like Why Does He Do That by Lundy Bancroft's another really good one. just to get a picture of what this dynamic is, because when you're in the middle of it, it's one of those hard to see the forest for the trees thing.
Yeah, like a goldfish swimming in water. If the water's come polluted, it's the only water you've ever swam in. So it's you don't notice. Yeah.
And then you, once you can get that overarching picture of the dynamic, then you can start to see, oh, you can label the behavior of each person in the dynamic, yourself and the other person. And that's the start, because then you can get this idea that, oh, well, I didn't really do what he said I did, or she said I did. Right. And that's the wedge into that process. But it goes on for a lifetime, because if you've been in a toxic relationship, there's always that doubt. Right. And so even after you get out of the relationship and maybe you get into another relationship and there's an argument, and then you worry, what did I do wrong? Like, you need to be able to look at the dynamic, and you need to be able to parse it out and see, oh, this is a normal conflict. This is a difference of opinion. Right. Right.
It's funny with my friends. Like, I was like texting with my husband now, and I was like, hey, I'm having a normal marriage fight. Like, I was like, I was like, nothing crazy happened. No names were thrown. Like, oh, it was just like, oh, we're having like a, is this what other people are talking about marriage problems? Like, when they say marriage is hard, is this what they're talking about? You know? And I was like, you know? Right. And quite honestly, I love Facebook posts now. I think it's people think they're doing the right thing to say happy anniversary or happy birthday. I know marriage is hard, but it's like they almost feel like they have to put that like catalyst in there. And I'm so grateful now for people who don't, because we have these things that we're swinging like, oh, people make their life look perfect online and everyone has problems. And I think we've swung too far in that arena, because we've said, oh, marriage is really hard, which is detrimental for someone being verbally abused to hear that marriage is hard, because what they are experiencing is like torture. It's abuse. It's torture. It's terrible. So when their friend says, oh, marriage is hard because he didn't clean up the bathroom when I asked him to, or, you know, he got home from work an hour late because he, you know, and didn't text me on time. Like, when they're saying like marriage is hard, and that's what they're talking about, and someone else is being cut to the core of their personhood and their soul is being sucked out. Yeah. Those aren't the same thing.
Right. But hard makes it sound like the same thing, right?
Exactly.
And so you end up feeling like, oh, well, this is what they mean by hard, and so I just got to keep going. Yeah.
Exactly. Oh, this is just normal. Everyone's experiencing this, and it's like, no, this is not. So there's a couple of people recently. I had an anniversary. A friend had an anniversary, a couple of anniversaries, and they didn't say, oh, we made it. There's been hard times. There's been this. They didn't like build it up to like apologize for a happy marriage. And I was so grateful they did not apologize for a happy marriage, because it seems nice and kind and whatever to brag about how hard marriage is. And I'm glad for people who don't apologize for it anymore. Like, we're happy. It's pretty easy. We really like each other. We don't fight very much. When we do fight, it's like this fight versus, you know, craziness. Yeah.
Right. But look how you're reflecting on that dynamic. And I think you're able to see it from a different perspective. And when you're in a toxic relationship, you can't see it from that perspective. And I think unless you get some information about what a toxic dynamic is, right? And then you can like float above the trees or jump out of the water if you're the goldfish, right?
Or even look at your life as if you're watching your favorite TV character and they were experiencing the fight you just had, or the date you just had, or the birthday you just had, and think, you know, how would I feel about that happening to my favorite character, right?
Right. I think the other thing that happens is we get caught up in this idea that we have to follow the rules, and the rules are you get married and you stay married, right? And the rules that the toxic person establishes, you try to follow those. I tried to follow all the rules of my grad program, and you just get like boxed into all of these rules. And the idea behind building up your self-worth is to examine which rules work for me. But like, how do I want to do this? And it's okay. I don't need to do it the way everybody is saying I need to do it. I think is an important aspect of that.
So in The Gift of Fear, there's this part of the book. If you read the book, I bet you remember it. And it was like they was talking about signage outside of jails or prison. And there would be a sign that said, "Don't bring in guns, knives, and explosives into the prison." And he said, the people who would, you and I, it would never occur to us to bring a bomb into a prison. Like, that seems like a really terrible idea. Like, I don't bring knives into anywhere, much less prisons, But so he pointed out the people who, would follow the rules don't need the sign.
Yes.
And the people who are going to blow up the jail or take a knife to, my hair's falling down, so the knife to their friend or whatever. They went down crazy here, don't care. But the person who would do that isn't going to follow the rules anyway.
Right.
So the rules are for the people who don't need them.
Yes, exactly.
And then the rest of us are left trying to follow these rules that are hurting us, not helping us.
Right. Exactly. And, we actually, sometimes we think of those rules as like the law of gravity.
Sure.
And we need to challenge that idea because it's, there are times when you need to get out of relationships. That means divorce. There are times when you've got kids and you need to do that. Right. And that's a hard one because a lot of people stay in relationships for their children. If you're in school, sometimes the degree that you want isn't on the menu. And so you have to run around and put together something that works for you and get, you get it approved, but by the school, but you do it your own way. And I try to tell people this all the time, even if it's not about a toxic relationship, but it's like, if you're going for a job interview, you're not the only one being interviewed here, people. You need to interview the people you're working with and the company you're potentially working for. And yes, and the same would be for relationships.
Yes. Doing the choosing, not just hoping to be chosen.
Yes. Yeah. And you know what? And one of the things that it comes back to when we're talking about self-worth is this idea that what do you need? How are you going to choose for yourself if you don't even know what you need? And I think those relationships take that away from us a lot of times. It all becomes about the other person or the other people, if it's a whole family. And so back up, what do you need? And how do you even figure that out if the demands to meet other people's needs are so strong and you've never been given the luxury of, well, what is it do you need or want? And so I really advocate that people take a breath and ask themselves, well, what do I want here? Well, I don't know. It doesn't matter. I don't care if I have Italian or Mexican. I'll just do whatever he or she wants because that'll be easier, right? You can choose whatever they want, but ask yourself what you want. And then check in with what you want. Was that really good, or would I have preferred a different choice? So now you're starting to evaluate, well, how do I have my own wants? What are they? And you have to pick incorrectly sometimes to figure out that wasn't what you wanted.
Right. Fail forward. That's part of it.
Yes. Yeah. But do it on little things that don't matter. Start there because that's a pretty short leap, right? And then you can start building from there. And I remember the day we had this long, I think a lot of relationships, you have these like standing arguments. Like there's this thing you can't ever agree on, right? Mm-hmm. And in a normal marriage, you talk about the fact that you're not ever going to agree, but then you work out how you're going to work around that, right? Mm-hmm. In toxic relationship, if you don't agree with your partner, it's like I called it this Chinese water torture. There was this drip and you did it that way. And if you said, no, that's not good for me, there was this drip about why you should do it and why it is good for you. And one of the things that I want people to start to do is to say no. No is a complete sentence. You're going to have to say it quite a bit, but we had this standing argument of who was going to make dinner. And it was always me because I like to cook, but I don't like to cook every single night. And sometimes I want somebody to cook for me, but that wasn't something and he wasn't a cook and he didn't know how to operate in the kitchen. So I think he was a little bit of a klutz in that regard. Takeout works perfectly well. Right. And he had this, one day he came up to me and he wanted to know if I would mow the lawn. And I could have mowed. I had time and I knew how to do it. Right. But I was like, no. And that was it. I wasn't going to mow the lawn. And he did eventually give into that. And I just very consistently said no. It was the first thing I said no to. And
that's what I would choose to say no to as well. If I was going to.
Right. And, I grew up on a farm. I knew how to do all this stuff. I could do stuff that most people wouldn't know how to do. Mm-hmm. Right. Mm-hmm. And so, and on a farm, you just do what needs to be done. And so I think I had that in my background too. It's one of my rules.
I mowed the yard. My dad is so obsessive about his yard. He made a diagram for how to mow. And then we had family night where we watched the lawnmower videos, and I get along with my dad really well, but I mean, it was just like traumatic. I was like, I don't want to mow.
Right. Right.
I'll get it wrong.
But I think, it can be a small thing. Find something to say no to. Mm-hmm. and see how well you can do. Because if you can find something where you can set a boundary and say no and maintain it, that's just like a little toehold. I know that's difficult in a toxic relationship. And in some relationships, that's just not going to be possible. And you're going to have to leave before you can do that. And leaving is the no at that point. Right. But a lot of times, if it hasn't gotten to the point of physical abuse, there's probably something in there that you can say no to. And if you can find that, then that can be one thing to help you start working on the self-worth. And then I put together this little map, because most of us have things that we like to do. If we were kids, even if we were growing up in a toxic family, we could go off on our own and draw. Mm-hmm. And drawing could become something you're really good at, but then maybe it's not part of your life now, but it's something you really enjoy. And so what this worksheet does is it takes you back to something that you know how to do and that you enjoy doing. And it walks you through, what is this thing and what do you enjoy about it and how good are, write about how good you are at it. And then build up the confidence in that area. And then ask yourself, what is something that you'd like to be able to do? Right. So maybe it's bake a souffle. Mm-hmm. And it's not about the dynamic of the relationship, but then you learn how to bake a souffle so that it rises and stays risen. Right. Mm-hmm. And you go, I can do this. And then you get this, I can, there is something in there about me that is good and I can do it and I'm capable. Right. And from that, you can start building. Because once you can get that in your head, I am capable, it can almost kind of piss you off when you start getting the
which
message.
Is a good thing.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, some people are afraid of that anger, but anger is energy when used in the right way. Most people need that burst of energy, that flight. They need to get into that rather than freeze to make a move.
And harness it.
Yeah.
I've worked with people around harnessing that, because you're right. Anger is a very active emotion. It doesn't have to be full of destruction. You can channel it into constructive ways and use it to your advantage. And then when you no longer need it, let it go.
Yeah. Well, Julie, where can people find more out about you?
Oh, yeah. Well, there's my website, drjulieshafer.com. And I'm on Facebook at Dr. Julie Shafer, and I'm on Instagram at Dr. Julie Shafer. So you can find me there too. And I've included a link to the self-worth building worksheet for the podcast here. So yeah.
I really love that idea of, I'm obsessed with strength-based healing. So
yeah.
I really like the idea of that worksheet and kind of like finding something you already feel good at and using the neural pathways there to transfer into other areas rather than starting from scratch.
Yeah. Yeah. I totally agree with the strength-based approach, because I mean, we all have weaknesses and you can work on them all day long. They're still going to be your weaknesses. So focus on your strengths. Yeah. Focus on your strengths.
Strengths and self-worth. Thank you. So if you could have a 1-minute broadcast to the entire world and just say one thing, what would you say?
To the entire world about anything?
Yes, it can be anything. Yes.
Well, I think that I have this idea recently that we can get a little caught up in self-help. Self-help is a really good thing. I love self-help. I'm a self-help junkie, but the inherent idea under self-help is that you need help. And that makes people believe there's something wrong with them. And so if you're chasing self-help to fix your brokenness, you're on the wrong path, because you're not broken. You're a wonderful, beautiful human being in a difficult situation. You might not know how to get out of it. And that's why you're reaching out for self-help, but don't think that you're broken.
Love it. Love it. Check out Dr. Julie Shafer. Dr. Julie Shafer. I got tongue-tied. I'm used to calling you Julie. I've been putting everything together. And Julie, thank you for helping us on our journey to becoming toxic person proof.